Welcome back to Building Bigger Lives with Michael Regan and Kathryn Peterson. And today we're going to unpack a topic that I'm sure you noticed when you clicked through. It's professional peer groups. And I think for any of you out there in our audience, whether like Kathryn and I, we operate primarily in the housing industry, or if you're in a different vertical business model, regardless of the industry that you operate in, these are very popular concepts that we see really across all platforms. And so we want to talk about them today. What are professional peer groups? What do they typically look like? Why do people choose to get involved with one? How do they operate? And probably many more things we'll get to talk about. But rather than giving you an entire outline, let me first say hello to my good friend and fabulous co-host. Hi, Kathryn.
Always good to see you, Michael.
Yeah, great to be with you and great to unpack this with you because this is one that both of us have some experience with. And so I really want to start by maybe putting you in the position of helping us get this started. When you hear professional peer groups, what are some of the things that come to mind when you hear that phrase, and maybe give me an example of where that piqued your interest and where you might have originally gotten involved with one?
So I'm in a small town. We've talked about that a bunch. And who I get to talk to every day is can be really limited based on what I proactively set up in my own life. So I'm a fish in a very, very tiny pond, and I knew a long time ago that I needed to expand what I was around and who I was talking to. And so I've kind of been uh, in a lot of different ones over the years because of that.
And so you're referencing it based on your geography. So in your mind, are professional peer groups always like a local gathering? Are these people that, have to sit around in the same room together or at the same coffee shop? What does that look like in your mind?
Yeah, so for me, it was actually opposite of that, where I was like, I need to get out of this location and I need to talk to some people that aren't in a tiny ski town, but are in my same industry and producing roughly the same and kind of are experiencing similar things to what I am that are going to have different thoughts on how to run their business, how to run their team, how to, just different insights that'll give me a different perspective into my business.
Got it. So, had you seen other people doing this before you and you felt inspired by it, or did this idea hit you out of the blue? Where did you begin your journey with a peer group?
First, I think it started at conferences that I was like, hey, I need to get out and see the world a little bit. It sounds like I was a baby, but kind of was. And then you start to connect with people who are in at the conferences and say, hey, let's stay in touch. And so some of it kind of starts small, but honestly, really, really where it started was with you and you putting together some groups of like-minded originators who were doing similar things in their business to kind of mastermind with. And that's really where it started for me. So thank you for that.
Well, that wasn't like a selfless plug. You could have said, "Hey, before I met you, I learned this concept." But it is true that when we put together a few of those gatherings at the time, I called them roundtables, and the reason I chose that was actually really intentional. I don't think we ever
Mm,
sat at a physically round table. It was the idea that when you visualize a round table, everyone has an equal view, equal seat, equal angle. And I wanted a sense where we're all coming together, and this is not, someone pontificating to the rest of the
yeah.
group. This was not, oh, bring your PowerPoint presentation and wow us with your ability to, speak with, eloquence and wisdom. It was for the purpose of peer-to-peer professional sharpening, but in a format that I intentionally designed that way, and it probably came from some ideas that I had seen that predated what we even did. And
Hmm.
so I've seen lots of these over the years. One of the ones that comes to mind is an experience that I had, gosh, 20 at least 20 years ago, with our friend Todd Bookspan, who we had on the podcast early last year. And Todd, who many of you that listen may know as the founder of Win by Noon, but who also has led a really great high performance Bookspan Baker team out of the Phoenix, Arizona market for a long, long time. And Todd, at some point or another, really, I think, put the idea of this concept in my head because he was doing some of this prior to me doing it. He was in these type of gatherings with other people, and some of them he was the one who spurred this idea into action, and some of
Mhm.
them he got invited into by other folks that were peers. But what always seemed to come out of them was this renewed sense of energy. He always seemed to come out of them with this sense of energy. And I'm just curious for you, Catherine, when you've left gatherings like that, whether they've been in person or they were maybe virtual as time went on, what do you think's driving that energy? Like, what's that emotion that people feel when they finally get in a room like that? They meet some people that they're willing to engage with, and the exchange happens. What's driving that energy?
So I think you get this strange camaraderie of people who are facing the same challenges as you are and who can understand and relate to where you are in your business and your career of, hey, I've been talking to people all day about, like where they're getting their business from, but really one of my challenges right now is how to create efficiency with my team and hiring people and different challenges than I faced 5 years ago. So when you finally get in a room and can feel that camaraderie and can start to hear like, oh yeah, this is a great idea, it you kind of rise to a different level and you're able to um, just think through problems in a different way. And that creates that energy and momentum that sometimes you need to push through those next level challenges.
Okay, I'm going to drill into that a little bit because I think you highlighted a couple of things there that maybe our audience can relate to. So
Hmm.
let's take the positive ones first. Was it affirming to recognize that okay, I'm not the only one maybe dealing with that problem, or I'm not the only one with this crazy idea to try something new, or I'm not the only one who did try that idea but figured out, oh my gosh, there's a better way. Are these some of the emotional responses you remember?
Absolutely, exactly that of, and then it's almost like you find these friends that you didn't know existed and you were feeling alone and now you don't feel alone anymore.
I
S-
think that you just really hit it because most of us that operate our own businesses, whether we are in sales or operations as our primary role, if we're responsible, and by the way, when I say operate your own business, let's be clear. This is not a IRS standard of whether you're a W-2 or a 1099 or whether you have an S corp or a C corp. This is the attitude in which you have embraced the career you're in. If you are an ownership minded person, um, it tends to be lonely. You tend to find it's very
Mhm.
difficult when you're the team leader or you're the branch leader or you're the top producer or you're whatever version of operator that you exist in as an entrepreneur. And that loneliness is real. So finding other people that you can actually connect with. I mean, you said friend. I think that's a powerful word because sometimes that's a conflict for people in our audience. Well, I'm not looking for friends. I've got plenty of friends. These are my but this is a different kind of friendship. This is
Yeah.
like finally somebody who's for 10, 12 hours a day slugging out the same battle that I am and they get it. They know what it
Mhm.
feels like. That's a different level of connection than most people typically get when they're operating a business.
Yeah, so true. And I think that it's at least the friendships I've made through it, I can call them, even if we haven't talked for a while, and say, "Hey, here's something that came up. What do you think I should do?" And or, "Hey, how did you approach this when you faced this similar challenge?" And I think those are great people to have. And I'll tell you those things like we had we've talked a little bit about personal board of directors. It's kind of becomes that a little bit that you've just got
Mm.
another gut to help make decisions through, or if you're stuck as a person to call, even if you're not in an active group, it creates a different bond that you can really go back to later as you face new challenges in your business.
Yeah, that's really powerful. So, okay, so we've got some context now for this. Let's be more specific. Like once someone has said, "Okay, I like this idea. I'm willing to find out that there are other people out in the world who are either excited about the things I'm excited about or
Mhm.
struggling with the things I'm struggling with, and I could benefit from that experience." What does it actually start to look like? Like, are these groups of three people or 300 people? What does a gathering look like? Do you meet for 10 minutes or 10 hours? Like, give us a sense of how you move this idea into some initial action.
I think it depends a little bit about what you're trying to get out of it. So some of the roundtable stuff we did was 1 or 2 days, pretty like specific agenda, just so we made sure to talk about certain things. But it was really, hey, I'm going to focus everything for these 2 days. And I think that's one way to do it. Another way could be that you say, hey, I have these relationships. Let's talk every month and just bring up, hey, here's kind of what's going on right now and what I'm looking at, and how can I get through this challenge, or how I have a question. So it can be different things depending on what's going to be helpful. Sometimes it's good just to completely disconnect and get together with a group. And I think that is a different output than if you have kind of a continuous, and it could start with that and then continue forward too. So I think it just depends a little bit on what's going to be possible for you and what's going to work and who you know. Because obviously, if you don't know anybody, you might have to say, hey, I'm going to pay to go to a group so that I can meet people to continue with. Or, hey, the next conference I go to, I'm going to be really intentional about creating contacts that might be interested in something like this that we can pull together.
Okay, that you're going down an interesting thread there because I think both of those exist and maybe some other options do as well. I do think some people are natural networkers, especially if the type of business that they operate requires them to be professionally selling. They're naturally networking as part of their daily routine. So the idea of networking with their peers
Mhm.
isn't such a foreign concept. So your point is, hey, just be really intentional about that. You might find out that if you simply put this idea out there, more people than you might believe would respond
Mhm.
positively to it. But then there are other folks, and it may not be because they don't understand how to professionally network, but maybe they just for whatever reason they're a little more introverted, or for whatever reason they're a little more isolated. Maybe the model they operate in isn't as interactive as others. And so going to an event, a conference,
Mhm.
joining some sort of larger group might give them an opportunity to create that smaller group out of that. In fact, some of those groups are somewhat prepackaged that way. I know we've been to a
Yeah.
couple of conferences that that's one of the desire. I mean, I remember when we went to Momentum Builders. That was one of the desired outcomes for folks like Craig Davis, was to put together these groups that would meet directly out of that conference. Like, hey, while you're here, sign up, and we're going to create these. And so that's a great way for someone who might not be ready to, just create something out of nothing, to
Mhm.
maybe try this idea. Are there some pros and cons to either, or some things you might say, hey, this tends to get further faster. This tends to be a little tougher if you're attempting to get started in a professional peer group?
I think it just depends on who you know. Because if you're not the type to be like, hey, I'm organizing a group, do you want to go? And that can be really, really difficult. So I think that it's just going to be what's going to actually happen. And it might be, if you're newer in the industry, that might be a little harder. Like your company might have some things you can do. But like I recently just started a new one with somebody else, and we knew some people and kind of said, hey, who do you think might be a good fit? Let's reach out. And so it was easier to create because of past relationships that we have, versus if you're at a different point in your career, that might be hard to pull together unless you've got some way to do that, or you can start really bringing it up in different areas, LinkedIn, Facebook, things like that, to try to find some people. But that's also going to take some courage.
Well, but I'm glad you said those things, because sometimes we miss that. It's like the forest through the trees problem. We
Hmm.
forget that uh, social media, whether we're talking maybe Facebook on a personal side or LinkedIn on a professional side, or the blurry lines that they've both become, it's hard to tell where one begins and the other ends. Um, those were originally designed to be virtual versions of your real life networks. That's what the original
Hmm.
content was. I mean, originally, on Facebook, these were your friends. If you even went back and watched, the old movie about Facebook, the whole idea was, hey, these were people we know on the college campus. let's create a way to, connect so we
Yeah.
can actually build relationships because it was hard to build relationships in real life. This was a way to facilitate it. Well, LinkedIn, originally you couldn't even send a LinkedIn connection request to someone unless there was a statement you clicked that said, I already know them. Like, and same on the recipient's end. They had permission to say, no, I don't know them. So those social networks are a great place if you're curious about this because you may find, oh yeah, I already do know quite a few peers. I've just never thought about this concept until Kathryn or Michael brings it up. So don't miss that one. That's a really good one. But there's an earlier one you referenced that I want to dig into a little bit. What are the pros and cons of if your company creates these? Because sometimes organizations do this, and I want to
Mhm.
say with good intent, they'll put together little pods or small groups
Yeah.
that gather. What do you see of the pros and cons of a company-based peer-to-peer group?
So I think that I've been in both. I've been in ones that are within the company and ones that are separate, like a president's club type of,
Hmm.
um, it was a little different than that, but, and it was PAC, President's Advisory Council. So sometimes that can be good because you can meet other people that you may not otherwise meet, and you guys are all going to have the same products. You're all going to have the same marketing systems. So you can really dig into the systems of the company. I think the downside, so the one I have now is a mixture of companies, which is great because I think everyone has a little bit different perspective. In fact, there's two brokers and two bankers so far, or maybe it's two and three. So it's even different ways to do the business. So I think the good thing about that is it provides some variety in, hey, we're doing something a little bit different with how we, approach our marketing that could be helpful. Or, hey, I created a system outside of our system because I really dig into the organization of the loan process or whatever it could be. So I think there are pluses and minuses. I think some of the connections I've made while at prior companies because of those smaller groups have really helped me cement some relationships that'll last forever. So I think there's advantages and disadvantages to both of those.
Got it. And, okay, couple of more things that I hope our audience is at least thinking about if this is an idea they at least have tried before, but maybe haven't figured out or are willing to try because they're intrigued. How do you structure the gathering itself? I mean, whether you meet virtually or in person, is there a best practice around how this gathering works, whether it's how long we meet, how frequently we meet? Any best practices that you've found from those experiences?
Again, it depends a little bit on the output that you're looking for. So obviously a round table is different than an ongoing peer group. And I would say you definitely want to say, hey, what's going to work for everybody to meet? Is it meeting every other week? If it's some more tactical, strategic stuff, is it just kind of a place to run stuff by that we could do it every month or two? And I think the most important thing, though, is the people who are in it and that you are working with people who, let's say, have a similar mindset as to growth that are going to be open to share, open to listen, and kind of aiming towards that same form of success of, hey, I do want to build my business, or hey, I am looking at, adding to my team or whatever that is, that at least, you kind of have a similar mindset and with people you feel comfortable sharing those things with.
Is structure critical to the success, or is free flow better for this kind of a gathering?
Well, I have an opinion, but I think it could a little bit depend on the person. I think some structure is great because if you have an idea of like, hey, we meet once a month at this time, you're going to have a lot more success with being consistent. I think that having some sort of idea of what you're going to talk about can be helpful. Like I know the roundtables that we've done that's a day, if we didn't have an agenda, we just totally would have gone off track because we were so excited to be in the same room together. And so I think having some sort of structure around what you're going to talk about can be really, really helpful, even if it's just a question of that everyone's going to answer. Hey, what are your wins in the last month? What are some great ideas that you've thought of in the last month? What are you implementing this month? What are some challenges that you've got going on? So it can be really simple, but I think having some sort of structure could be helpful.
Yeah, you said something that resonates with me because it's certainly true in coaching, and so it would apply just the same in any kind of a small group like this. It's getting clear on what is it that each of you want to get out of this. Because if everybody comes together on the idea that, oh, I like being in a room with people that are dealing with the same things I'm dealing with, but they all want something different out of why we got
Mhm.
together, that well, first of all, if everybody's clear on that, then at least you have an opportunity to say, well, is it even possible to meet everybody's needs? Or is it possible that one of you just wants something that the other three weren't really signing up for? And now we can, with some degree of respect, say, I don't think that's really the purpose of this group.
Right.
So I guess that's the word I'll leave with on this topic is, or at least on this section is, um, be clear on the purpose. Why does your group exist? If it's just for a social outlet, that's different than if it's for, like you said, tactical tips and tricks, which could be different than larger scale strategies, which could be different than systems. You referenced all these things, and so understanding the purpose. Can we cover lots of those, or is that too much? That might determine how frequently. That might determine how long we meet as well, because sometimes shorter, more frequent makes sense for the purpose. And other times you need a little more space. You might even need some pre-work. You might need to say, hey, I put some energy into coming into our peer group and have
Mhm.
some things I'm ready to ask about or talk about. I'll stop rambling with this one to also talk about the power of questions. I know when we've done roundtables, I really try to set the table with that up front is let's remember the power of
Mhm.
asking really great questions. And sometimes that's exciting for people, and sometimes that's different than they're used to because if they've been the lone wolf in their environment, they're used to being the person providing the answers, not
Mhm.
always the questions. And in these groups, I've found if you can really resist the temptation of jumping in and solutioning or jumping in and just sharing an opinion and lead in with a question or two to demonstrate curiosity, to demonstrate your openness, really changes the temperature of the water in a room and it allows everybody to participate a little more equally.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. And I think that's part of who you pick too. I mean, if you're gonna have a room of people who only try to posture and show how great their business is, that's not a it's not gonna be conducive to growth. And so it has to be a group of people who is kind of willing to be on both ends of the questions. And
Well,
that
that's
that's where the magic happens.
really well said, Catherine. All right. So as we pull this train into the station today, any closing thoughts? If someone out there said, "Okay, I'm intrigued by this. I've tried a peer group before, or I've never tried it, but I'm willing to try it." Any closing thoughts that you would say would be really helpful to the audience member who's interested in a peer-to-peer professional group?
I would say, test it out. It's even if it doesn't last for a long time, I can't think of one that I haven't gotten a great nugget out of, even if it's been a meeting or two. So don't hesitate to create something and just see what comes of it. It might evolve over time. It might be that you scrap that and start with something new, but there's definitely a benefit there, regardless of your business, regardless of where you are in your career, regardless of where you sit every day. Probably a group you can create that'll help you elevate whatever you're doing and whatever that project is that you're working on.
Yeah, I love that takeaway. And that reinforces an idea that I think applies to a lot of things in life. We sometimes forget that when we agree to try something, it's okay to say, yeah, that didn't really work for me. Or
Mhm.
for now that I understand what that looked like, if I'm going to do it again, I would like it to be different. And so give yourself permission to say, I'm not making a covenant or a contract or a lifetime commitment here. I'm just going to give this a shot. And
Yeah.
maybe once or twice is enough to determine, is this a good fit for what I think both I would be looking for, but also what I think I could contribute, because it's got to be a two-way exchange. If it's just what am I going to get out of it, it won't have nearly the longevity and impact as if everyone's ideology is what can I contribute to it as well?
Mhm.
Because technically, when we're all, as entrepreneur leaders contributing collaboratively, the power in a room like that can be amazing, and it doesn't need to be a very big group. I mean, we're talking 4 to 6 people can be really powerful, and maybe
Mhm.
that's going to be my final closing thought. Don't make these groups too big. It's always tempting to think that more is better, and in some things in life that can be true. This would not be one of them. I would say there's probably a sweet spot in most group dynamics of around 6 or 7. So, if you can get in that 4 to 6 or that 6 to 8 window, you're probably hitting the sweet spot. It doesn't mean you can't
Mhm.
pull it off with 9, but there's going to be somebody that doesn't get the same time and participation. And it doesn't mean you can't pull it off with 3, but you're probably going to run out of interesting things to discuss. So consider that. There's nothing wrong with smaller groups or bigger groups, but the sweet spot is probably in that 6 or 7 window. So try to keep it small. Kathryn, thanks for unpacking this one today. Professional peer group, something that I know we both are active in ourselves and something we believe in, but fun to share it with our audience today. I really appreciate you playing along and letting us know how you've processed those over the years.
Absolutely. You know what I was thinking? I need to find a podcasting one.
You know what? That is the great place to end this one. Okay, folks, you'll hear about the follow-up. Part 2. It'll be coming. Thanks for joining us today on the Building Bigger Lives podcast. If you're tuned in on Apple, Spotify, watching us on YouTube, maybe even on your Amazon Prime, I thank you for making sure that you've subscribed and continued to listen to and share these episodes with folks in your professional network who you might believe would benefit from the topics we have. There's a whole back catalog, over a year's worth of episodes. So go back and find a topic that maybe you missed along the way. Go revisit it, go replay it, comment as you do, and we'd love to see you on a podcast with us again soon. Have a great week.